world history. Dr. Philip Travis here, and I'm coming to you from Syracuse, the island of Ortygia in Sicily. And I'm standing next to the ruins of the Temple of Apollo, a Greek ruin built in the 5th or 6th century BCE. Many might imagine that wasn't world history born out of an attempt to effectively decenter the Western bias in history? In this video, I'm going to tell you why an ancient Greek ruin like the Temple of Apollo, built here in Sicily on Ortygia Island, actually conveys, perhaps as well as anything, the real meaning and purpose of world history. So that question I was posing in the lead-in video, what is world history? There's a number of different approaches to doing world history. However, one of the most common, and I think really at the core of what the discipline of world history is understanding historical change through the lens of connections. Okay, so understanding how historical change develops as a result of interconnections, global world interconnections, the interactions of people, of animals, of diseases, through processes such as trade, war, economic exchanges, and so on. So this is really, I think, at the core of what world history is thinking about change over time. Remember, historians are most interested in thinking about and understanding change over time. How has change happened in the past, and what forces and factors drove that change, and what were the consequences from it? The world historians often, not always, but often at the center of what world historians do is understanding historical change in the past by understanding how connections, interactions, interconnectivity has driven change, has created sort of the path of historical change over time. Sicily, which you see right here, is actually a perfect place to sort of think about this, to contemplate this. Even though oftentimes world history as a discipline was to a large degree grounded on the basis of decentering Europe. Okay, and of course this is a Renaissance Europe map from 1500. For those in my world history part 2 class, we start there. So I thought I would use that, for this map, since this is what the geopolitical map of Europe looks like at this time. Though I'm going to use this for my other World History Part 1 courses as well. But Sicily's right here. I mean, oftentimes world history in terms of its historical development, it was largely driven by the idea of decentering the sort of bias of the Western perspective in history. However, you can still do and think about world history from really anywhere in the world, because again, you're thinking about that change through the interconnections and how those interconnections beyond the state or national level have driven long-term change. Okay, so Sicily is, even though in Europe, here in the Mediterranean, Sicily is actually a really, really great place to think about what world history is. And of course, the reason for that is because Sicily was kind of an interconnection point. It was a centerpiece point where sort of every peoples through the ages, well into the 20th century, went to at some point, even during World War II, of course, the Allied assault to defeat Nazi-controlled, fascist-controlled Europe really began, in Europe at least, first on the island of Malta right here, and then on Sicily, before even D-Day occurred. In that original lead-in video, I showed us the Temple of Apollo in Ortigia, Sicily, the island of Ortigia, which is in the city of Syracuse in Sicily, which is a very, very ancient place. It was a place that was a colony of the ancient Greeks. It was controlled by, of course, the Romans conquered Ortigia and, of course, the Greek territories in Sicily. It was controlled by Muslims, particularly the Saracens. It was influenced by the Normans. Yes, the Normans, the same Normans that founded modern England, and of course later controlled by the Spanish and so on before the unification of modern Italy, which doesn't occur until the end of the 19th century. But looking at these images here, of course, you see here you're sort of what you would expect with your Greek columns, right? However, you see in this image, you see the evidence of this interconnection. You see here, if you might notice this archway here in the building, you might notice that this is maybe not what you would think about from Greek construction, and you'd be right, because that's actually a Norman arch here. This is actually Norman constructed. This was controlled by the Byzantines. It was at one point closed down when it was controlled primarily by Christian forces under the Byzantine. It was controlled as a mosque under the Muslim Empire of the Saracens. It was used by the Normans following the Norman conquest. And so you see all of this type of evidence here just by looking at the historical, archaeological artifacts that exist there today. If you travel to the sort of south west of Ortigia, of Sicily, you come across the Roman villa of Casale. And here, and I have another video, I encourage you to subscribe to my channel, History Changes, and in there I have a video that kind of walks you through the incredible mosaics at this Roman villa in Sicily. And it was like Pompeii. Of course, Pompeii and Herculaneum, these were buried by Mount Vesuvius's eruption in 79 CE. Those are towns, if you will. This is just a villa, but it is very large, and it was covered by mud. And in the process, it preserved tremendously the elaborate mosaics in this villa. And this really comes from the late imperial period of Rome. But again, you come here and you see yet the interconnections driving history as you see imagery of Roman conquest and Roman trade and colonialism during the Roman period, which of course had profound effects on populations and the environment, as well as animal and wildlife populations in places like North Africa, the Middle East, and other parts of Europe. You come to Palermo. If you go to the northwest, you find the city of Palermo. And here you find a tremendous amount, again, of interconnections shaping the city and the places that you visit and see today. And particularly, the images that you see here really represent a sort of syncretism between Western culture, particularly Western Christian culture, Byzantine culture, and Islamic influence. Okay? You have structures like this here, where you really see the North African influence. This, of course, this is the Cathedral of Palermo. It is very much in the center of the old area of the city. This is another look at this famous cathedral, which has, imagery, or I shouldn't say imagery, which has structures and engineering and design, which represents, Western European influence, this Norman arch here, but also you see very much the North African influence in this as well. So if you're traveling to a place like this, you can look at these things and contemplate world history and understand how there's a syncretism involved, a synthesis, a coming together of different peoples, different ideas, different ways of doing things, ways of building, ways of understanding in the world, and that those new ways of thinking and understanding in the world very much shape the world you see today. And so if you understand that world history is really about thinking about change through understanding these interconnections, it really will shape how you see the places you visit, but it will also shape how you think about change in the world today. So, world history. There's a lot of different ways of approaching world history. However, one of the most common is to think about it through the lens of interconnectivity, global interconnectivity, and how interconnections in peoples and ideas and plants and animals and so forth from different parts of the world coming together can really does really drive and shape historical change over time, creating the modern world.